Hello everyone, let's jump straight into the masterpiece of this section, the Risk Management Plan, or what we often call the RMP. When we talk about this professionally, the Risk Management Plan is a component of the Project Management Plan that describes how risk management activities will be structured and performed. In our everyday office language, I want you to think of this as the rule book for the game. It's not the list of actual risks, that's the register. But this is the document that tells us how we are going to play. Think of it like a professional sports league. Before the season starts, they don't list every injury that might happen. Instead, they agree on how many referees will be on the field, what the penalties are, and how they'll keep score. I once worked with a team that tried to manage a $50 million project with no RMP. It was chaos. Everyone had a different idea of what a big risk was. By creating the plan, we finally all spoke the same language. So now that we've mastered the idea that the RMP is our strategic rulebook, you might be wondering what the very first chapter of that rulebook should be. Well, that brings us right into our next step, which is defining our risk methodology. The first big part of our plan is the methodology, which defines the specific approaches, tools, and data sources that will be used to perform risk management on this specific project. In simple English, we are deciding what tools are in our toolbox. Stay with me here because not every project needs a heavy, complex system. If you are building a small garden shed, your methodology might just be a simple spreadsheet and a weekly chat. But if you are building a nuclear power plant, you are going to need advanced software and deep mathematical models. You've probably seen this at work where a process feels way too complicated for a small task or way too thin for a big one. The methodology ensures the size of the risk management matches the size of the project. So now that we've mastered the idea of choosing the right tools for the job, you might be wondering who actually gets to hold those tools and do the work. Well, that brings us right into our next step, which is roles and responsibilities. A crucial section of our RMP is defining roles and responsibilities, which identifies the lead, support, and risk management team members for each type of activity in the risk management plan and clarifies their assignments. In plain English, we are putting names in boxes. We need to know who is the risk lead, making sure meetings happen, and who are the risk owners responsible for watching specific threats. It's like a neighborhood watch program. You can't just say we should all watch for burglars. You need to know that Joe is watching the north gate and Sarah is watching the south gate. I remember a project where a major risk became a reality and everyone just stood around looking at each other because no one was officially assigned to it. We want to avoid that not my job syndrome by being crystal clear in our plan. So now that we've mastered the idea of assigning clear owners to our risk tasks, you might be wondering where the money for all this watching and acting comes from. Well, that brings us right into our next step, which is budgeting and funding for risk. In the RMP, we must include a section for funding, which identifies the funds needed to perform risk management activities and establishes protocols for the application of contingency and management reserves. In simple terms, this is our war chest. We need to agree on how much money is set aside for the maybes. Stay with me because there's a big difference between the contingency reserve, which is for risks we have identified, and the management reserve, which is for those unknown unknowns. It's like having a savings account for car repairs you expect, like new tires, and a separate emergency fund for things you don't, like a sudden storm damaging your roof. You've probably seen a project manager have to beg for money when a risk hits. We include this in the RMP so the money is already there and the rules for spending it are clear. So now that we've mastered the idea of securing our project's safety net of cash, you might be wondering when and how often we should be checking in on these risks. Well, that brings us right into our next step, which is timing and frequency. Timing is the part of the RMP that defines when and how often the risk management processes will be performed throughout the project lifecycle. In our everyday language, this is the heartbeat of our risk plan. Is this a once a week conversation or a once a month deep dive? Let's break this down together. If your project is moving at 100 miles an hour, you might need a risk minute in every daily stand-up. If it's a slow moving research project, maybe a monthly review is enough. I once had a student who thought they only needed to do risk management at the beginning of the project. I told him, think of it like checking your GPS while driving. If you only look at it when you leave the driveway, you're going to get lost pretty fast. We need a regular rhythm to stay on track. So now that we've mastered the idea of setting a consistent heartbeat for our risk activities, you might be wondering how we keep the score during those meetings. Well, that brings us right into our final step, which is risk categories and the RBS. The final major piece of our RMP is defining risk categories, often organized into a risk breakdown structure or RBS, which provides a hierarchical representation of potential sources of risk. In very simple terms, this is our filing cabinet. It helps us group risks so we don't miss anything. We might have a drawer for technical risks, one for external risks, and one for organizational risks. Without these categories, your risk list usually just becomes a big, messy pile of stuff that's hard to manage. Think of it like organizing your kitchen. If you put all the spices in one cabinet, all the pots in another, and all the snacks in a third, you can find exactly what you need in a heartbeat. The RBS does that for your project uncertainty. So, now that we've mastered the full structure of the risk management plan, from the methodology to the filing cabinet, you might be wondering how we actually fill that cabinet with real risks. We are going to discuss methodology selection in details in next chapter.